Thank you, Madeleine. Always inspiring. All your support has been amazing. How are you guys doing? How are you holding up? I'm gonna have to get back into it. This is the first time that we do a 2-day conference, and sort of going out at the reception day one is always a little dangerous. But anyway, thank you for being here again for day 2. Jane talked about how you get both tech and finance here in this conference, and as you can see, I'm trying to confuse people having both a hoodie and a button-down jacket. I don't know if Kelsey is still here, but certainly peer pressure works on me very well. Okay, so just picking back up where we left it yesterday. For those of you who were here, you see that we went through a couple of big themes yesterday. As Madeleine said, sort of reminded us, we covered quite a bit of the first two in terms of both the growth of contributions and the growth of adoption that we're seeing of many of our projects. And so I want to pick it sort of back up from where we left it yesterday, in this idea that the trust that we are able to really offer as a community in so many different levels allows us to think big, allows us to, as Madeleine said, take stock of the growth that we've experienced and think big for the next 5 years. We heard from Kelsey yesterday. I think it was a very inspiring talk, besides sort of the dress code conversation. And you know, how open source can really fundamentally change markets and complete layers of technology like the cloud native space. And so I think hopefully you left inspired thinking what we can do sort of to think big. And as Madeleine said, we're looking for feedback, and hopefully today is going to give you some, you know, food for thoughts as to what we're looking to do and where you can help us. So we talked about the different levels of trust. Where we left it yesterday was really about how FINOS, beyond sort of the basic IP stewardship and neutral ownership, really enables industries to thrive in the open. But as we kind of look at today's landscape, I would argue that we can up the ante, meaning it's even beyond what open source can do for a certain market or for a certain sort of economic dynamic. I happen to also lead with my other hat Linux Foundation Europe, and so I'm getting exposed to a lot of sort of broader dynamics of open source. And you know, it's arguably recognized now, not just from the private sector, but also by the public sector. And this is a regulated industry, so of course sort of kind of working in between those two areas. So not only open source is recognized as a, you know, fundamental piece of critical infrastructure, you know, the White House being very, very involved, and as well in Europe in open source supply chain security, both measuring and funding and securing open source as a, again, fundamental piece of infrastructure. But especially in Europe and, you know, even in the US, in California, we're seeing a lot of new software regulation coming down. Again, with my LF Europe hat on, I spent the last 2 years working on the Cyber Resilience Act, the AI Act. You know, has open source makes up 80 to 90% of software, depending on who you ask. Of course, open source is now having to face you know, new challenges in terms of compliance and regulation. That said, open source has been named and explicitly excluded from some of these regulations for the sort of innovative power that it has. But I'll push it even further. We're starting now to see, not just at national level, but sort of transnational level, global level, partnerships being built, multi-stakeholder partnerships of what is actually deemed to be critical infrastructure based on open source that ought to be owned jointly, both by the public and private sector. One of the projects of Linux Foundation Europe is the Open Wallet Foundation. Earlier this year, we announced a partnership with the UN, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, to build a forum where we can bring together governments and private sector stakeholders to build a truly interoperable wallet that brings back sort of digital identity and transaction and everything that you expect from a wallet back in the hands of individuals. And this is, I think, the part that has been kind of very inspiring for me this year. Earlier this year, we were at the UN for a OSPO for Good hosted event. I know many in this room were there. Really, the UN convened a lot of global leaders in open source under the notion of open source being a digital public good and understanding how can it be applied to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Linux Foundation has several projects, and arguably FINOS, being sort of financial inclusion, part of those SDGs. There's been really a unique sort of awareness of what open source can do for, again, higher order challenges, above and beyond technology, above and beyond sort of just the economy, if that makes sense, just the economy. Which brings me to a project that is near and dear to my heart. Earlier this year, we announced a merger of a sister foundation, OS Climate, under the FINOS umbrella. OS Climate is the, again, was a Linux Foundation project now under FINOS, focused on climate and sustainability aligned investing. Once again, applying open source to an area that is highly fragmented and where there is dire need for transparency and for, again, an open source approach that can bring together so many different data sources, so many different, where standardization is certainly highly in need. Take a look at the announcement. Again, OS Climate is now, all the projects of OS Climate are under FINOS. This is a overview of the 4 main projects of OS Climate that are really brought together by the data commons. And just to be clear, we're talking about the impact that this can have, again, on pressing challenge like climate change. But I want to be clear that ESG, despite all the talk, has remained and remains a priority for the C-suite in 2024, as not just for financial services, but certainly for regulators, and you'd argue for Main Street, for every industry out there. There's regulations in Europe, CSRD, that really requires, at this point, having a sort of clear view and understanding of the impact on climate. And that kind of closes the circle in my mind. I always say the open source is a positive-sum game. The open source is not charity, especially in these organizations, in this industry. And that's true. It means that you can work on something that delivers directly to the value and the needs of your organizations while actually doing something good for the world. And that's what I mean by positive-sum game. I actually think open source has a unique power to achieve that. This is absolutely not my area of expertise, but it certainly is the area of expertise of our next speaker, which I'm very, very excited to bring on stage. Johnny Mattimore is a partner, financial services and sustainable finance at BIP Group. BIP Group is a premier member and contributor of OS Climate. And whilst up to a couple of days ago, I had no idea who Johnny Carson was, I will say, here's Johnny.